As you know, today there are three really binding constraints. It's NVIDIA chips, it's actually silicon surrounding it, and then it's energy. And all three are constrained. And then it's really maybe not the best word, but the gain of function of AI is actually progressing faster.
Hello everyone, this is BTC Insight and welcome to yet another deep dive into BTC Insight. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. You won't want to miss this.
Tom Lee begins with a simple truth. Most investors are structurally blind to long-term cycles. Fundstrat's research is thematic by design. They look for 10 to 15-year story arcs that reshape everything from demographics to technology to macroeconomics. Lee notes that Fundstrat turned structurally bullish on markets as early as 2009 because their cycle work indicated a long-term bull market was beginning. Then, in 2018, they identified two massive supercycles that would dominate the coming decades. The millennial supercycle, the largest generation entering peak earning and spending years, the global prime age labor shortage, a structural scarcity of skilled workers that pushes businesses to adopt automation and AI.
What people have a hard time understanding and grasping are supercycles because Fundstrat's work by nature is thematic. We look for story arcs that last 10 to 15 years. So the reason we turned structurally bullish in 2009, was because our cycle work showed that there was a long-term bull market starting. And beginning in 2018, we identified two future supercycles. One was millennials and the fact that they're entering the prime age workforce. That was a powerful tailwind that would last up to 20 years. And the second was there was a global prime age workforce labor shortage. I know it sounds like plain vanilla to say that, but that was going to set the stage for an AI boom. So we're in the midst of an AI boom that is causing prices to levitate. But this is pretty textbook. In 1991 to 99, there was a labor shortage and tech boomed. 1948 to 67, there was a labor shortage and tech boomed. So tech is booming, and a lot of people look at stocks that have a high Sharpe ratio, right? They're just going up and they assume it's a bubble. And so people have been chronically trying to short NVIDIA every step of the way up. And then the second thing people anchor to is that, well, many people aren't really that old in our business. I was actually an equity research analyst during the dotcom boom. So many people are saying this is just like the dotcom mania. There's some similarities, but we're so far from it. But everyone thinks that this is big again. And the mistake I think people make is they have to understand.
In the late 90s, right? Which was the heart of the
Yes, yeah. And I was actually helping doing the wireless sector. So they were part of that build out of the fiber and the cellular towers and the internet. I remembered that data networking analysts asked me, Tom, what is TCP IP? Because, wireless companies had to do some basic architecture. So this is very different because AI, of course, is gaining function. Internet wasn't gaining function. There was just a lot of spending. The thesis in telecoms back then, because people forget, because telecom was the CapEx boom, not internet. In the emerging markets, telecom spending was associated with GDP growth. So there was an emerging markets thesis around telecom spending that was in the mid 90s. But then that spilled over into the US digging up a lot of fiber everywhere on the railroads, on the streets. Many people were young, but they, Quest and everybody was laying fiber, and then they were laying fiber across the world with Global Crossing. The problem is internet consumption of that was not at all keeping pace with the explosion of the amount of fiber being laid. There was almost 99% dark fiber at the peak. Now, NVIDIA GPU usage, as you're saying, is pretty much 100% usage the minute they turn it on. It's a lot more like the Cheesecake Factory, where when Cheesecake Factory opens a store, it's at 98% capacity. As you know, today there are three really binding constraints. It's NVIDIA chips, it's actually silicon surrounding it, and then it's energy. And all three are constrained. And then it's really maybe not the best word, but the gain of function of AI is actually progressing faster. So there really right now is capital spending is behind the curve. It's well, number one, as your viewers know, people have gotten pretty bearish in the last couple of weeks because the government shutdown kind of has deprived the economy of money. And then the Treasury Department isn't dispersing funds, so their liquidity has shrunk. And it's caused stocks to actually wobble. And every time the S&P is down 2 or 3%, or AI stocks are down 5%, I think people get really cautious. I think, first of all, bullish sentiment is not even anchored properly. People become so hesitant. I think everybody thinks there's a top. Here's the thing. When everyone says there's a top, there cannot be a top. The top in the dotcom was because nobody thought stocks could ever fall. They actually thought we were entering like an era of continued prosperity. The second thing to keep in mind is that markets have been strong for the last 6 months. There is incredible demand for equities because people are really off sides. That's what you have to keep in mind. In April of this year, people thought we were facing Armageddon because of tariffs, and you had many economists proclaiming a recession, and that's how institutions traded. They were actually positioned for a massive bear. They can't fix that in 6 months. So we're now getting into year end where institutions, 80%, are trailing their benchmark this year. It's the worst performance for institutional fund managers in 30 years, and they have 10 weeks to fix it. They're going to be buying stocks. And finally, visibility for AI has not even been affected by the government shutdown or anything. So companies are going to start, as they think about 2026, start making announcements. So I think in the final months, I think one surprise is the AI trade's going to come back strong because it's wobbled. But the Fed is getting people scared because is the Fed going to suddenly hammer down on things? But keep in mind, inflation has been softening. So if they cut in December, they're confirming they're on an easing cycle. Now that meeting's not for a few weeks, but that would be really bullish for financials and small caps. And by the way, what's correlated to tech and financials and small caps? It's crypto. So I think you're going to have a massive crypto rally as well.
Recently, markets wobbled. The government shutdown pulled liquidity out of the system, and the Treasury stopped dispersing funds, causing risk assets to dip. But Lee thinks investors are mistakenly bearish. He argues sentiment today is warped. Every 2 to 3% dip in the S&P makes investors panic. Everyone assumes a top is near. But true market tops only happen when nobody thinks stocks can fall. In the dot-com era, people believed in endless prosperity. Today, investors assume disaster is around every corner. That alone means we're nowhere near a long-term top.
I think people have dampened their expectations for Bitcoin partly because Bitcoin's been treading water. And there have been a lot of OGs, original Bitcoiners that are selling above 100,000. But it is still an underallocated asset class. So I think Bitcoin actually potentially can get to the high 100,000s, maybe even 200,000 by the end of the year. I think it's a big ask. But to me, what's more obvious is Ethereum can have a huge move into year end because even Cathie Wood wrote about it. She thinks stable coins have been cannibalizing demand for Bitcoin, and gold and tokenized gold is cannibalizing demand for Bitcoin. But stable coins and tokenized gold run on smart contract blockchains like Ethereum, and Wall Street is building, and Larry Fink wants to tokenize everything on the blockchain. That means Ethereum is where people are starting to raise their growth expectations. And if you're raising your growth expectations, then your discount to the future is going up. So I think that there's a bigger move in Ethereum, and Mark Newton, our head of technical strategy, thinks we can be like 9 to 12,000 by January. I think that's about right. I think Ethereum, just 3,600 more than doubles between now and year end, or between now and January. One thing you're pointing out, and that's correct, is that 2025 is the third year where the S&P will be up double digits, probably up 20% this year. So 3 years of 20% gains in a row. Okay, remember at the end of 2022, people were saying we were Armageddon. Nobody was bullish. So in the last 3 years, wealthy individuals and hedge funds recommended people go to cash, or they do alternatives like private equity, private credit, or venture. But the S&P 500 has trounced all of those categories of assets. So this is a comeuppance because, 3-year return, what is someone's excuse for basically maybe having flat performance or up 15% when the S&P is almost, up 200%? So this is really the reason 2026 is probably not as bearish as people think, because now next year, I think people are going to be like, wow, wait, NVIDIA and all these are public companies and their earnings are growing 50%. I think people are going to actually start chasing them next year. That's really positive for crypto because, as you know, there is also this argument today that the crypto cycle is a 4-year cycle, so it should be ending now. So
Yep.
people are trying to fade that. I think people are trying to fade everything, the S&P and the crypto, but forgetting that the Fed is beginning to cut, and the ISM, and we've written about this, is more correlated to Bitcoin than monetary policy. And until the ISM gets to 60, Bitcoin really can't peak. So I think this is pretty positive for crypto. But crypto, it's kind of been hurt because, monetary liquidity hasn't been really increasing. The Fed has been under QT, quantitative tightening.
Yep.
That's ending in December. And the Fed hasn't really given clear signals that they want to ease. So I think there's been a little bit of confusion for investors.
And that wraps up today's deep dive into Tom Lee's latest market analysis. If there's one message he keeps repeating, it's this. We are living through a massive supercycle, not a short-term bubble. AI is not the dotcom boom. It is the real, productivity-driving, capacity-constrained technological revolution that historians will write about decades from now. Most investors today are afraid. Most institutions are behind. Most people are fighting the trend instead of understanding it.
That's it for today's look into BTC Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay on top of all the latest insights. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you in the next one.